It is my distinct pleasure to introduce Liesl Schmidt, who is a children's librarian at Denver Public, and Gigi Pagliarulo, who is also a children's librarian at the Denver Public Library. And this is the fourth in their webinar series supporting developing readers at the library. So I am going to turn it over to our presenters.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Christine. This is Liesl speaking. As Christine said, I'm a children's librarian here at the Central Library in Denver Public Library. Gigi, I don't know if you want to say hello. Maybe not. Maybe she'll say hello later. But today we're going to talk about ways to target our outreach efforts toward developing readers, specifically kids in kindergarten through third grade. This is the last in a series of CSL in-session webinars that librarians at Denver Public Library have put together to get us all talking and thinking about that age group specifically. So, to get us started, we want to know from you, what kinds of outreach have you been doing at your location? We'll be talking today about outreach in kindergarten through third grade, and I'm curious to know more about whether any of your outreach has specifically targeted that age group. Maybe you've been getting into schools, maybe you've been working with educators or families, or maybe you've been doing a lot of outreach for adults and you haven't really focused on this age group yet. So to share your experience, go down to that chat box, that main chat in the lower left of your screen, and just share what kinds of outreach have you been doing lately. We'll give people a minute to chat. I know we do a ton of outreach in DPL, but focusing on kindergarten through third grade was a new thing for us. It wasn't something we had always focused on. And so we'll be talking today about some of the strategies that we use when we work with that age group, some of the goals that we have. Looks like we've got people going to after school programs. That's great, Josh. Few visits to schools. Yeah, Deborah has public schools, community centers, daycare. Okay, this is great. This is great to see what y'all are up to. Free summer lunch programs, awesome. Jennifer Miera's got outreach at an after school program at a public school nearby, which is K through third primarily. That's great. Yeah, and we're going to talk about that, Annika, is that sometimes you're the only one in your department, or sometimes you're so swamped, it's hard to strategize around outreach. So it's hard to get that stuff going. So a lot of our talk today is going to be about how to build strategy around outreach. It's fantastic. All right. Well, if you have anything else to share, everybody, keep sharing, keep chatting about that. As Christine said, we want this to be a discussion. We want to hear what y'all are doing. There are so many different ways to do outreach. I'm going to keep on moving through, but keep sharing your thoughts down in that chat box. And it's going to be Gigi's turn. She's going to talk about why we're focusing on grade level reading.
Hey everybody, this is Gigi. Sorry, my mic was giving me troubles before, but here I am and ready to share with you. So we're going to start right in talking about why DPL is focusing on kindergarten through third grade level reading. So in Denver Public Schools, we've found that 38% of third graders are reading at grade level. That number is pretty low. Statewide in Colorado, it's not much higher. About 40% of third graders read at grade level. So one of our mayor's 5 goals for children is to increase the number of students who can read at grade level at the end of their third grade year. And our Denver Office of Children's Affairs states that, quote, "The ability to read at grade level by the end of third grade is an important marker for future academic success. Beginning in 4th grade, children transition from learning how to read to reading to learn." So this grade level reading work is an extension of our early literacy work, our Every Child Ready to Read work that serves children from birth to 5 and their parents and caregivers. And our focus on grade level reading is our next attempt with the warm handoff from birth through 5 to K through 3rd, serving children and their parents and caregivers. And we want to be really intentional about the transition from ready to read to learning to read, and ensure that our library staff is just as confident in serving and supporting those K through 3rd kiddos and their families in their reading journey, just as confident as they are in serving the younger children. So the first steps in this process involved hiring a limited term librarian, a 2-year term, creating a work team of 4 librarians, and doing a lot of research, and reconnecting with Denver Public Schools. So that limited term librarian was hired in March 2018, so we're very much still in the middle of our work. And then the internal work team was composed of children's library staff, including myself and some of my colleagues. And then reconnecting with Denver Public Schools. Denver Public Schools, the connection with them is really critical to understanding what reading instruction looks like for most, which is 80% of our customers. So it was really important to us that we made that connection. So there's a project mission for the grade level reading team and the initiative, and it's to support and empower library staff, families, and educators to connect children kinder through third grade with diverse books they enjoy and that inspire curiosity to foster lifelong readers. So grade level reading was first incorporated into the library's 2018 work plan, but there were no real specifics beyond their charge to determine ways to support grade level reading, which is a huge idea, and it was difficult to know exactly how to wrap our heads around our task, like what would the role of the library be, what would our work team's role be, how could we impact and make changes in a big way. So after some extensive research, we created a mission statement and a work plan with specific goals and objectives to guide our work. And this webinar series that we've been presenting has highlighted some of the services and practices we're piloting as a result of our research. And one of the concepts that's guiding our work is what we call the 5 grade level reading skills. So if you've never heard of these, don't panic. This isn't as ubiquitous as Talk, Sing, Read, Write, Play. It's just a title we gave to skills that all developing readers need. So I'm going to fill you in on the details now. So the first skill we're going to cover is background knowledge. Background knowledge refers to what kids already know before they begin reading a text, so all of that great information that they've been gleaning from all over the place. From birth, children are building background knowledge, and they're learning vocabulary and gaining an understanding of new concepts and experiences, and then that background knowledge is going to play a huge role in their process of learning to read. It also plays a role in skilled reading throughout our lives. If you think about some of the topics that you're most familiar with, those certainly influence and impact your reading. So the next topic, as we kind of go around, is reading motivation, and it's learning to read really takes a lot of practice. We're not born learning to read, but we're basically big data machines synthesizing all kinds of knowledge about letters and sounds and reading rules as we read more and more. So explicit, systematic instruction is crucial, but on top of that, it just takes a ton of practice. And kids who are excited to read and excited about what they're reading will be much more likely to get the practice that they need. Plus, kids who are engaged in what they're reading are much more likely to develop the focus they need to become skilled and lifelong readers. So we found that a huge factor in developing reading motivation is choice. Kids who are allowed and encouraged to exert some choice over what they read are much more motivated. Next, we have decoding. When we learn to read, we're learning to connect the way a word looks with how it sounds and what it means. And decoding is when we use our knowledge of letter-sound relationships to pronounce words that are written. That relationship between the way letters look and the way they sound is called phonics, as you probably know. So understanding phonics helps us decode words, and when learners sound out words, they are decoding them. Next, we have fluency, which is the ability to read a text quickly, accurately, and with expression. And it's the step that helps readers connect word recognition with word meaning. So this is the stage in which the phonological and orthographic reading networks are really working smoothly to create meaning with what kids are reading, and fluent readers recognize and comprehend at the same time, so it's a really seamless practice. And this practice of fluency happens when kids find books at the right level and they practice reading these books. And while we at the library, most of us don't provide explicit reading instruction, we do help connect kids and educators with books that are at the right level for helping them develop fluency. Next, we have comprehension. Comprehension is really the reason for reading. So all the skills we just talked about, background knowledge, decoding, reading motivation, and fluency add up finally to comprehension. So kids who are learning to read are also learning a variety of comprehension techniques that'll help them figure out the meaning of the text that they're reading. Considerate texts that we think are supportive. They support comprehension through features such as an introduction, a clear sequence of topics, and the use of cohesive words that tie the text together, like first, second, however, and although. So texts that introduce new word vocabulary carefully and repeat new words so the kids become familiar with them, excuse me, are also providing support for developing readers. And now I'm going to pass it on to Liesel while I drink.
Oh, thanks, Gigi. Yeah, so all of that introduction is just to show why we think this age group is important, this K through third age group is important. And then, as we said, a lot of figuring out outreach for the kindergarten through third age group is really figuring out our strategy and what we're focusing on. So when I'm doing, and we'll talk more about this throughout the presentation, but when I'm planning an outreach event, I find looking at those grade level reading skills is really helpful to me because it helps me figure out what are the things I need to focus on, what are the pieces of knowledge that I need to pass on to parents and caregivers and kids. So those grade level reading skills we'll kind of come back to a little bit down the road to try to look at what we should be doing in our outreach. But before we dive into that, let's clarify what we mean by outreach. For us here at DPL, outreach is anything that helps us reach our community beyond our library's four walls. So you're probably doing some kind of outreach in your work. When we did our chat, it looks like you were doing a lot of really great outreach to kindergarten through third graders. And if you're like me, you probably feel like there's a never-ending amount of outreach to be done. We're never done building relationships with our community outside the library. When you're trying to prioritize your outreach work, it can help to clarify those goals a little bit. So let's talk a little bit about that strategy, because I know every conversation I have about outreach is why should we do it, but also how much should we be doing? And having some kind of strategy can really help you figure out what to prioritize in that. So what are your outreach goals? Here at DPL, our discussions about outreach have raised questions about what we're trying to achieve with each event that we go to. And our goals tend to be focused in a couple of different directions. We're either trying to encourage the community to visit the library, or we're trying to bring the library resources out into the community. So it's either the community could come to us, to the library, and we're trying to make that happen, or we're trying to take the library out of the four walls of the library and go out into the community. Either direction, I think, is a good one. And those library resources can include books, but that category could also include the expertise that we bring as library staff. When we go out into the community and share knowledge about specific books or excellent books, when we share knowledge about ways that families can support kids as they learn to read, we're sharing a library resource. It's not just taking books out into the community, it's also taking ourselves and our expertise out into the community. And I don't think one of these goals is better than the other. Both of them represent ways that we can help kids and families as they learn to read. So when I'm planning an outreach event, I often ask myself what I think I can get done with that specific event. So will this event help me connect kids with books in general? Will I be able to connect kids with library books specifically? Will I be sharing other types of library resources? Or maybe this event, what I'm doing is I'm building relationships and supporting a strong community. That stuff is a little less tangible, but it's no less valuable. And let's talk a little bit more about those connections. So there's a group called the Global Family Research Project, and they help build strategy around family engagement. And this group, the Global Family Research Project, looks at engagement through the lens of the learning ecology. So the learning ecology is all of the spaces where kids learn and the connections that make them happen. So think about the people all around the different community and all of those connections and all of the places that families might spend time where kids are learning. So kids start learning at home. They go on to learn in the community and they learn at school. And the connections among all of these spaces are built by parents and caregivers, by educators, by community members, by policymakers. So when we do outreach, we can think about the connections among these spaces and places. We're considering ways not to just reach the kids themselves, but also the adults who work with kids. And I always try to look at places where there are gaps, where those connections might not be happening, and I might target my outreach to those specific areas. Oh, and I'm going to go back real quick, actually. I don't want to move on yet. Because at Denver Public Library, like Gigi said, we don't explicitly teach reading. Instead, we think of ourselves as connectors. We're part of this ecology of learning, connecting kids and families with resources, knowledge, and people who will help them as they learn to read. And when we talk about outreach, we're really just talking about that connection. So we're finding those disconnections, those gaps in the learning ecology. We're finding places where we can support. We know that learning to read is a really complex process. What Gigi was talking about with the 5 grade level reading skills, that is just a drop in the bucket of everything that kids need to learn to read. And it takes time and it takes effort. And it really takes a community. It takes all of these connections around the community to support kids as they develop those interconnected skills. So at the library, we can help support this learning by helping connect different zones of our customers' learning ecology. I try to think of the different ways we can help. I think we're a trusted source for caregivers who come to us with questions. We help families interpret what they're hearing in the classroom. We help them use the advice or instructions that they're getting from school. We also help kids find books at lots and lots of levels of complexity to help them practice what they're learning. And we design programs that include opportunities for practicing literacy skills. And then I think this last one is maybe the most important. We're cheerleaders for families as they go through the learning to read process. So when we do outreach, we're getting those supports out into the community. And it can help if we target our outreach towards some of those areas of the ecology of learning. So now we'll move on, and Gigi's going to come back to us and talk about outreach to parents and caregivers.
Thank you, Liesl. Yep, we are going to move right on to parent and caregiver outreach. Been focusing on that quite a bit lately. So we created a presentation called the Beginning Reader Book Tasting. And this training session was created by the grade level reading team, and it was created in order to provide parents and caregivers with some basic information and some actionable tips on how to support their children as they learn how to read. So the presentation includes background information about how children learn to read, the 5 grade level reading skills, as I shared with you, and some suggestions for selecting high quality early and transitional books across multiple genres and formats. So this is a short presentation. It's not extensive. It's really just kind of dipping in to share this information with folks without overwhelming them with information and new stuff that they might not know before. So the first portion of the presentation is 15 minutes long, and as we speak, we also pass around or display some examples of books that support each of the 5 skills, as well as examples of good early books and transitional books. And we also bring examples of good early picture books, graphic novels, nonfiction books, book packs, audiobooks, other supportive genres that can demonstrate the characteristics of good early books across these different formats. So the presentation also features an interactive portion, which I think is really kind of the best part of the whole shebang in the presentation. During this portion, participants have the opportunity to put their knowledge into action. So we bring multiple bundles of books. I have them kind of bundled up with rubber bands, and we hand them out to participants. Each bundle contains 5 books, 4 books that are good early books, and 1 that I call the red herring, which is not a good early book. And participants are directed to review each book for the supportive elements that we've talked about and discussed in the presentation, and then to determine which of the 5 books is not supportive and why. Small group, large group, individual discussions, those have all worked really well. Sometimes folks will just kind of come up to me individually or to the presenter individually and tell them their thoughts. Sometimes we share in a group setting. And it's been a really successful program. Short but sweet. During the program, we share this handout with the beginning reader book tasting participants, and this handout I think could easily be adapted for other library locations. We recently also had it translated into Spanish. The presentation itself has some pretty specific information relating to our Denver Public Schools and citywide reading statistics, as we shared with you earlier, but I think that this handout is really pretty easily adaptable. So we've made this presentation at several different venues and just had to tweak it just a shred for the different venues. The first one I want to talk about is called Little University for Grown-Ups, and that's a Denver Public Library program. So it's a parent and caregiver education session that takes place after our Little University programs at 7 of our Denver Public Library branch. So Little University itself is a unique and innovative early literacy program series featuring a play-based learning model. And then after a Little University session, branches do have the option to offer a Little University for Grown-Up session, and that's a special add-on session for caregivers to build upon what their children have learned during Little University. Think of it as a kind of behind-the-scenes look into what skills children are learning while participating in these early learning programs, as well as an offering for caregivers to learn new things. So our Little University for Grown-Ups presentations have typically followed book-based Little University session where presenters are coming in and playing and working with different books. And we tend to do that so just we can extend the ideas of literacy and the warm handoff between early literacy and grade level reading. And our sessions to date have been met with really good attendance, really good feedback, a lot of positive feedback. And we've been really pleased with that and are going to continue to offer that into the new year as well. Even though not every branch at Denver Public Library offers Little University, the ones that do have been really enthusiastic. And, as folks transition out of it, their children outgrow the program, then new families are going to come in and be a great audience for us. The next venue that I want to share with you are Denver Public Schools Family Literacy Nights. They're designed to encourage and empower parents to engage in their child's education. They take place after the school day has ended. They're fun, informative evenings. They create an opportunity for parents and children to learn together. And refreshments and childcare are provided so parents can attend informational sessions. These events have really been a perfect platform for our presentation and message, and they've been extremely well received. So that's another great setting if that's something that's offered in your community or something like that. To get into those events is really valuable to target a chunk of folks that you might not see otherwise. They may not be coming into the library, may not be coming into your library. Another venue that I'm really excited about. We have an upcoming presentation at the Denver Women's Correctional Facility, and we think this is going to be a super important venue for our information. Attendance is voluntary. Other DPL early learning presentations that have taken place there have seen high numbers of attendees and really received excellent feedback, both from the women and the correctional facility administration. So incarcerated parents are often deeply concerned with their children's education, but they frequently feel powerless to positively influence and impact that process from afar. So during this presentation, we'll provide information and knowledge that help women feel empowered to work with their children or with the caregivers that care for their children to support their children's learning. So other DPL branches have also been working on K-3rd outreach to parents and caregivers. Staff from many branches regularly participate in these family literacy nights at their neighborhood schools and their service areas, and they build relationships with the families there. They communicate and share information and resources, and then listen and respond to community requests for library services, which I think is such a hugely important part of outreach as well. So next, we'll talk a little bit about outreach to policymakers. We've consistently found this to be the trickiest piece of the types of outreach that we do. So how has DPL connected with the policymakers in our community? We have made some inroads with Denver Public Schools Educational Technology and Library Services, known as ETLS. Members of the grade level reading team met with the head of ETLS to share our project scope and solicit input on DPS wants and needs from the library to support K-3rd students in literacy. So let's start with our successes. We've created a YouTube channel which ETLS staff requested, a YouTube channel with book talks to be used by DPS educators and shared with DPS students. ETLS curriculum specialists did provide feedback on our 5 skills as we were developing them. DPL librarians provided information and background on performing a diversity audit to ETLS staff. DPS also provided training to DPL staff on the way that the school's leveling schema works, which is quite intricate and involved. And then our grade level reading team members have an upcoming meeting with literacy curriculum specialists to see how DPL can support DPS's student literacy goals. So that's where we really feel like we've made some good inroads. They are somewhat of a challenging organization to work with. They're very segmented and siloed, and personnel can often be difficult to communicate with. Establishing an ongoing working relationship has been tough. I think folks are pulled in many different directions in their organization as well, and they tend to have some difficulties communicating a unified vision in their own internal organizational goals, whether they're personnel changes or just kind of a lack of unity. So we've struggled with that somewhat, but we do feel pleased with the successes that we've had with that type of outreach. So we're going to do a little participation here. You can raise your hand if you've been able to build strong relationships with policymakers in your community. And Christine's going to tell us how to raise your hand.
And for those of you who may not have used Adobe Connect before, in the upper left-hand corner, kind of towards the middle, there's like a little person with its hand raised. There's a little drop-down arrow that you can use to raise your hand or agree or disagree to the question on the screen. So we're just curious to see How many
So
of you
raise
are
your
going to
hand if you're able to build strong relationships with policymakers in your community.
And if you've got specifics to share, feel free to share those in your chat box. Like Gigi said, we're curious about this because it's the hardest part for us. We find a lot of connections in other areas, but policymakers or those kind of bigger decision makers sometimes can be a little bit harder for us to make those strong connections. It could be political. I see Annika's talking down in the chat. She's asking if we mean only political. It could be political. It could be like the administrative offices in your school district, the people who are kind of changing the bigger policies that are making things happen. And you know, we kind of kept it open because I know different communities have different people in those roles. So it may be that others are having a hard time with that too. You know, we've really tried connecting with the administrators in Denver Public Schools, as Gigi said, but that can be a struggle for us. Yeah,
Yeah,
one half
Annika
a
says
hand.
half a hand. Yeah, that sounds about right. That is not an unfamiliar type of sentiment. There are some successes, but a lot of work still to be done.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Yeah, and I think it's valuable. This kind of work is valuable because the policymakers might make it easier for other work to happen. So even though it is a challenge, and people who are in that policy making position might have their own priorities, um, it can make it easier to make the other connections in that learning ecology. So it's an important thing to keep thinking about. But yeah, it's a challenge for sure, and it's not the most obvious way to do outreach for sure.
And I see Deborah says I work with community programs like the extension office, daycare, etc. So, are you working with the administration, Deborah, or are you working with the frontline staff, or a little bit of both? Got it. Yeah, it's really tough to get into those admin folks. I think they are pulled in a lot of different directions. I think sometimes people see libraries as like, well, they'll always be there and they always kind of do a good job. So it's not our priority to liaise with them, and yet we have so much good stuff to share with them. So it's a pickle.
All right, y'all. Well, keep chatting, keep thinking about that as we go. And Gigi, if you're ready, I'll take over and we'll move on to a
Yeah,
different,
go
slightly
right
easier
ahead,
kind of
Lisa.
outreach. Awesome. So policymakers are hard to connect with. I find that one of the most straightforward ways to do outreach to kindergarten through third grade is through educator and school outreach. And we saw that. We saw a lot of y'all are already doing that kind of work. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can strategize that work and how we can focus on the specific needs of kids who are developing their reading skills when we do that work. Within schools, we can either attempt to directly reach students, or we can still, even there's some choices. We can reach educators directly. So it's either going to the kids specifically, or we can focus on the teachers. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is those classroom visits to work directly with students. Um, I know a lot of you are already doing those classroom visits. A few of you mentioned those already. I would really love to see if y'all are comfortable doing it. Raise your hand if you're doing classroom visits as a regular part of your outreach. I'm going to raise my hand. I've never done it before. Let's see. Yeah, yep, I've got my hand up. Gigi's got her hand up. Yeah, it looks like Deborah's got her hand up. So a few of you, yeah, a lot of you are doing some kind of classroom visits. And that's what I suspected. Classroom visits can be a really great way to do outreach. Some of you might not be doing those yet, and that's okay. I know a lot of you are working in an area where you might be alone in the library, or you might not have the support to get out, because it does take time to do those classroom visits. So we'll talk about some alternatives to those as well. But first, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I plan a classroom visit to try to make sure it's as effective as possible. It is a time-consuming way to do outreach. So when I do it, I want to make sure that I'm really reaching the needs of developing readers. So when I go into a classroom, I always spend a little bit of time promoting library resources like our books, our programs, our library spaces, and that's to try to get kids to visit the library. That's that first of those outreach goals, trying to get kids to come to the library. But I'm not convinced that that technique is the most effective with this age group, at least not in the age group or in the community where I work. So I work at DPL's Central Library, which is located in downtown Denver. It's close to several schools, but because of busy roads, it's really hard for kids to walk to our library on their own. If I want kids to visit the library, I really have to convince the grown-ups to bring them. And unless my talk is really, really exciting, I'm not sure that what I say to a kindergartner at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday is going to make it back to the grown-ups who will make the decision to bring the kids to the library. So because of that, when I make a classroom visit, I do spend a little bit of time encouraging kids to visit the library, but I try to spend more time bringing the library to the kids. And when I think about that, a lot of what I think about is that expertise. I try to think of myself as not necessarily always bringing the resources, but bringing my knowledge of what kids need when they're learning to read to the kids. So we talked about the 5 grade level reading skills, and one of those grade level reading skills was reading motivation. And that's something that the library does really well, and it's super important, and it's something that kids don't always get in schools. So I try to make my visit to the school, to the classroom, into a little break in the day in which kids can get excited about books. I'll usually start off my visit with a discussion meant to build a conversation and a culture around books. A great way to start is by asking, just straightforward, asking if anyone has read a book recently that they've enjoyed. When a kid mentions a popular book, I'll ask if anyone else in the class has read it. And it's great when the class breaks into crosstalk about why they liked a book. So hopefully I can get a conversation going where one kid says, I loved Diary of a Wimpy Kid, and another kid says, oh, I read that book, and I can ask, has anyone else read that book? And hopefully everybody gets talking about it, and we get some good conversation going. I also want to help kids get comfortable finding books that they enjoy reading. That's not always obvious to a kid, how to find a book that they would actually like. So I'll ask how they find books to read. This question is inspired by Donna Lynn Miller's book about reading motivation, which is called The Book Whisperer, Awakening the Inner Reader in Every Child. And that's a great book for getting some ideas for getting kids excited about reading. Often kids aren't sure how to find books that they enjoy. It could be that every book they've ever read has been handed to them by an adult with mixed results, because adults, have their own agendas about why they're handing a kid a book, why they want kids to read, and enjoyment isn't always at the top of the list. So I try to get kids to identify lots of ways that they can help themselves find a good book. I try to get them to think about getting recommendations from friends, suggestions from librarians, finding books on display at the school library or the public library. Maybe kids will find an author they love or a series they love. I think that's really common, right? Where they're reading all of Dave Pilkey's books or what have you. Or maybe they're finding subjects that interest them. And again, I'm trying to get them to identify those ideas on their own so that they can start to define themselves as people who are able to do that, who are able to find books that they like and who enjoy reading. And then another thing I like to ask is why they read. That's another thing a lot of kids have never thought about before. I've asked this in questions in classes, and the only answer kids want to give me is to learn. I feel like that's such a coached answer from teachers. And of course it's true, right? Kids do read to learn, and it's really important. It's a really important reason to read, but it's only the beginning of why we read. So I try to bring in some other ideas. I try to push them towards other ideas. When we read, we learn about the world, but we also read to laugh, to feel scared. If you're reading one of those scary books, a lot of kids like that. You're reading to pass the time, to feel sad. Maybe you're reading to distract yourself from feeling sad. You want to see things from another person's point of view. And it's helpful to make space for the truth that sometimes we read just because someone is making us read. I feel like acknowledging that negative side, that we read just because we're being made to, opens up the idea that maybe we also read sometimes because we want to. And the more I can get kids to find reasons in particular why they like to read, the more I'm helping them define themselves as readers. And I feel like that's a good use of my time in the classroom is helping kids figure out that they might enjoy reading and they might develop that reading motivation.
Yeah,
So
we
in my
really
classroom
appreciate
visits,
that
yeah, go
thoughtful
ahead, Gigi.
perspective, Lisa. I just really appreciate that thoughtful perspective and kind of getting kids to open their minds to.
Yeah, exactly. I think when I'm in a classroom, that's one of the things I can do that they're not getting elsewhere, right? They're not getting in other parts of the school day necessarily. I think some classes are, but certainly from my conversations, some classes just aren't. There's so much to learn in a day. They're just not focusing on that enjoyment. So in my classroom visits, I'll try to do some book talks and I'll read aloud too, but I always try to keep the focus on books that kids have easy access to. So read alouds work well because they're getting the book right there and then in the moment. And if you can do remote checkouts, if you can check books out directly to kids, that's awesome because then kids don't need to wait to get the books. But again, I'm always worried about our kids actually coming to the library. How able are they to come to the library? And I try to get the resources out to the kids as much as I can. So you could also partner with the school library and you could do your book talks on books that the kids have available there, right there in the school library. And at the very least, I like to send home a bookmark of the books that I talked about so that kids have that list with them. And I'll encourage kids to mark the books they want as I talk about them so that they have something concrete to take home with them.
And I
So
just wanted
working
to
with kids, yeah.
mention real quick, sorry to interrupt, Liesl, that
No,
we
go
have
ahead.
a service at Denver Public Library called Personalized Reading Lists where kids can, or families, parents, caregivers can fill out a short form about the types of books that their kids have read, that they're interested in, what they might like to read next, their reading level, and then we'll provide them with a short list of about 5 to 8 books. And we are going to be experimenting with bringing a paper copy of that form out into the community when we do outreach so that folks don't have to only access that service through our website, but they can get at it through.
Yeah, that's another great resource that we can offer and to try to help get that library expertise outside of the library and into the community. And I do think of that as another form of outreach, right? It's not always us physically leaving the library. Some of it is our digital resources that we can offer. It might be other ways of connecting with people outside of the library that is not always, if we're short on time or short on staff, it doesn't always require us to physically be going to every area of the community. We have lots of digital ways of communicating too, and it's reaching people outside of our four walls. So I think it's absolutely outreach. And another way to streamline your outreach and to try to make your outreach as time effective as possible is to focus on educator connections. So it's super fun to go and do classroom visits, and I think it is effective if you plan it the right way. But working directly with teachers and only with teachers can be also a very effective way to use your time. Because each teacher works with dozens of students, working with educators can be a way to build our capacity. It's like a lever. Our efforts can go further because educators have sustained relationships with so many kids. So when you teach a teacher something, they're going to go on and teach every kid in their classroom that same thing. If you let a teacher know about a resource that you have, they're going to go on and share that resource with all of the kids that they work with. And they have those kids for much more time, and they have more communication techniques to get in touch with the families and caregivers as well. So that can be a really way to use your time. And you can do that pretty effectively. Teachers are also really busy. Like we're really busy as librarians and library staff, but teachers, if anything, are busier than we are. So they're going to use their time very effectively. And our communication techniques for getting in touch with teachers can be very time efficient. So you could go to teacher work days, you could visit staff meetings, and then never underestimate the power of a simple email. Just because it doesn't take much time doesn't mean it's not effective. I like to stay in touch with teachers by emailing them about library resources, library events. Maybe I'll share book suggestions. I think that way of communicating with teachers can, depending on the teaching community, can be a really fast and easy way to get teachers to know what's going on with you and what's going on with the library. And it happens so fast, but I think they appreciate that, and then they can go on and share that information with caregivers and families. And as part of that trying to connect with educators, I do have some suggestions. One thing I find is that it helps to keep up with what's going on in education. I've got some resources listed here to help you kind of keep up to date on what teachers might be talking about. And that way, when you're going out and talking with teachers, you kind of know what might be in the conversation a little bit. So Chalkbeat is a nonprofit news organization that can help you keep up to date on local and national education news. And if you haven't already signed up for their free email newsletter, I'd recommend considering it. You'll get an email every day and it'll kind of tell you what's going on in education in Colorado, and then you're ready to talk about that with teachers. Reading Rockets is super helpful as well. It's a huge compendium of resources on learning to read, and it can be a really great way to just kind of keep up to date with what the conversation is on how kids learn to read. Then I've got a couple of books listed. There's so many books about learning to read and education. These two books that I have listed here, they've been a big part of the education conversation in the last year or so. The Knowledge Gap just came out this summer, and Language at the Speed of Sight came out last year. And when I'm out in the education community, I find that these books are books that educators are talking about. So it's just good to keep in mind that these might be conversations that they might be having. But my suggestion with all of this stuff is to follow the discussion, keep up with current science, but be aware that these conversations in the education world can be fraught. We know that teachers, just like we are super passionate and they bring a lot of knowledge to the work that they do, and they don't want to be told how to do their job. You know, that we're not trying to be in the role of telling them information that they feel that they already feel comfortable with, or that might be controversial in the education world. But at the same time, knowing about this stuff has helped me improve my professional practice. I can field questions from educators better because I know what's going on in their field, and it helps me speak from a place of knowledge when educators are coming to me or when parents are coming to me with questions. So it's good to keep up on, just so you know what's going on in the conversation. But I try to be open to where educators are coming from when they come to me with questions. So we've talked about the other areas of the learning ecology. We've talked about policymakers, we've talked about parents and caregivers and educators. So you can also think about, as you're planning your outreach strategy, you can also think about community outreach, ways to connect with the community at large. Where else do kids and families spend their time? Are there businesses or nonprofits that will help you reach kindergarten through third graders? By showing up in the community, you can help complete the connection to the rest of the learning ecology. So just for example, this summer I worked with a registered neighborhood organization here in Denver to put on a concert at a park. This is a kind of outreach we do all the time. You know, it's not a new kind of outreach for us, but because I was focused on kindergarten through third graders, I used that lens to plan the event. So I chose the park based on its proximity to a school with lots of families that we don't see very often at the library. And then I made a very special attempt to market the event to K through third classrooms at the nearest school. And then during the event, I knew going into it that my goal for this event was going to be to build relationships. So it's that less tangible goal, but it was to get those kind of conversations going on with families in grades kindergarten through third grade. All
And I
right,
just
so
want to
those are, yeah.
say a little bit of something about the idea of that lens that Liesl mentioned. That's something what we've really focused on here is kind of using that terminology as an idea for the work that we do, using the lens of K through third services whether it's outreach, whether it's programming, whether it's things related to library materials, saying that we're looking at it through the lens of K through third, just like folks might be looking at other things through the lens of EDI, equity, diversity, and inclusion. We're also looking through the lens of K through third, and that really helps us kind of focus and target the work that we do when we are serving that demographic.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a lot of this is not changing the work that you're doing radically. It's just finding that lens and finding that strategy so that you can feel that you're being most effective. And with that in mind, we now have some time to talk about that. So we really wanted to keep this open. We know that everybody is serving a really different community. So we've got some chat here. And Gigi, I don't know if you want to introduce these questions for folks.
Sure. So we're going to start, and you can just continue to chat in that little corner box about what resources your library has to share with developing readers and their families. So feel free to start typing away, and we can start by sharing a little bit more about some of the resources that we've shared, everything from book lists, bookmarks that have been created by a sort of a central bookmark committee at our library. That's a resource that goes out into the community, any kind of print collateral like those bookmarks or that handout that talks about the 5th-grade level reading skills. Have been, kind of an easy win getting those into folks' hands. Of course, it's not always a guarantee that kiddos are going to bring stuff home, and we do hand things to them, but hopefully it can go into their weekly folders, whether we get those resources into the hands of teachers or the kids themselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, exactly. And I find that when we do print collateral, it can be a really great way to reach families. And I just want to, I always try to make sure that our print collateral is very professionally made so that we maintain that role as a trusted source. So we try to be really careful about the books that we suggest on bookmarks. We try to really use the knowledge that we've built up about how kids learn to read to make sure we're really suggesting the best resources. And that helps us maintain that position as a trusted source within our community. But it can also be a really good way of just letting people know we do have this level of expertise. We do have this knowledge about reading, and when you need that source, this is a place to go. So yeah, bookmarks are a great thing that we use. A lot of it is honestly letting people know that that they can ask us for reading advice. So those customized book lists that Gigi mentioned can be really helpful. I'm trying to look down and see what we've got people talking
That's a
about.
really great question, Lisa. It's quite a fraught issue, leveling readers. What we found is that a couple of things. Publishers pay to have their books leveled, so it's a for-profit system. Um, each publishing company has a different leveling system, so there really is no cohesion. Um, we have a loose leveling system at the Denver Public Library, but we try to generally stay away from recommending levels as that's been shown to be limiting in some instances that a child says, well, I read at such and such a level, and so they're not willing or their family isn't willing to kind of go outside those really narrow parameters, and in that way they may be missing things that would provide excellent reading motivation or excellent background knowledge or something that with a little bit of guidance and support they could find to be an achievable level for them, but because they're sort of siloed into that level, they can miss things. Is there an online resource that anyone likes? If anybody wants to chime in. We do label the books. We have a loose leveling system, but within that leveling system, there's an enormous amount of variety with each book. So folks are often encouraged to physically open up the book, take a look at the text, share it if the child is there, share it with the child, use the 5-finger rule. If Lisa, you can go a little bit more into what that rule, how that rule looks, perhaps, but
Sure, and
we
something I'd
are,
like to point
yeah.
out is that we try to support families when they come into us. So we try to keep up on what it means to be a Lexile level and what it means to be an AR book and that kind of thing. We try to maintain our knowledge about those kinds of levels. But what we also know about learning to read is that it's very beneficial for kids to read books at a variety of levels. So it's really good for kids to read books that are maybe too easy for them, so, they might say, or books that
Sense of
are
mastery.
exactly on that level, or books that are harder for them. All of those things are actually really good for kids. So it's a balance between responding to the expressed need that the family has and the need that they're probably getting from their classroom teachers. And then at the same time, we're trying to keep in mind that what we serve at the library, the way that we do things at the library, where having access to all of those different books is really helpful to kids, and research has shown is a very beneficial thing. We try to make that knowledge available to people as well.
And we try to lead with a yes. If someone says, do you have books at Lexile such and such a level? Uh, there was a time when we would say something like, well, that's not how we organize the books. And we've really moved away from that and moved towards saying we definitely have books that are going to be great for your kid. We definitely have books that will be a good fit for your child today, and then start to show them books in a variety of different collections, whether that's the traditional beginning readers or early reader collection, whether that's a picture book, whether that's often a nonfiction book. There's so much wonderful, easy nonfiction that's available these days. So we really try to lead with a yes. Yes, we have books today that are going to be a great fit for your kid. And then if we need to get into the nitty-gritty of the way that we organize books or why we don't use that specific leveling system, then we can. But kind of starting off and saying we're here to help and we can help, we found to be extremely effective.
So I'm curious to know, as we were having this discussion, have you identified any outreach opportunities, maybe spaces that you've missed in your community that will help you make some of these resources available to your community? Like, are there areas where you've been like, oh, I should be doing this more, I should be focused more on this? I know, just to start us off, I always, talk a lot about connecting with educators. And every time I talk about it, I'm like, oh, I should do that more. I should spend more time connecting with educators, because again, classroom visits are very obvious, but I do really think that connecting with educators is helpful. So what are you all thinking? What are some new ideas that you might have about places that you can connect with your community to reach those K through 3rd people, K through 3rd age kids?
While we're thinking about it, I'll mention a special resource in the city of Denver. It's called The Gathering Place. It's a daytime drop-in shelter for women, children, and transgender individuals experiencing homelessness and poverty. It's a daytime shelter, so it isn't open overnight. They have a wonderful family area, and they have a huge swath of services for the clients that go there. So mothers can go in there and know that their children are safe and being taken care of while they are doing their laundry and putting together resumes and learning computer skills and shopping at the free boutique and shopping at the food pantry and getting a prepared meal. And we have a staff member that goes in every week, provides a story time for whoever is there, whatever age children are there, and it's just kind of a different venue for our message and for our information, and connecting with a lot of customers that we may not see any other time. Boxes at bus stops that we stock with free books for anyone to grab. We could make this more focused and better marketed. Yeah, those are really interesting resources. Those boxes or little free libraries or all of those sort of open honor system types of making materials available. Yeah, focused and better marketed. Absolutely.
Yeah, so if you have any other ideas, this is a time to share them. Hopefully you're thinking of ideas on your own. Hopefully you're identifying some outreach opportunities. Again, I know that our time is very limited as library staff. We serve a lot of areas of the community. This K through 3rd age group can be kind of a narrow window, a narrow age group in all of the age groups that we're serving. But hopefully these ideas of creating a strategy around this and kind of narrowing your focus a little bit can help you start to identify the ways to make this the most effective. I see we've got a little bit more typing. Please keep typing. We've got a few more minutes left in our webinar, so I'm going to just move ahead a little bit, but please do keep sharing your ideas. I just wanted to let you all know that we do have our sources and further reading listed here. Please do take a look at these resources. This is where we got a lot of the information that we shared with you today, and they're kind of some of the inspiration that we use when we're planning our ideas and our strategies. Christine is letting you know that the slides will also be available in the archive, which is great. I see that Susan is sharing that there are books for sale at the post office, which is awesome. That is another great community resource, right? Community part of the learning ecology. And then stocking children's books at the local diner. Yeah, that's great. All of those community resources, looking at the places where families are spending time. So hopefully you're doing that. Hopefully you're starting to identify those places where families are spending time and ways that you can connect with families that are serving that specific age group.
I've seen some initiatives that place books in barbershops and salons. Books are but also been placed in laundromats. That's another initiative that has some national support behind it. Some organizations. So just really thinking about where kids and families are spending time, and getting your services there, your outreach efforts there. Little free libraries are always great as well. Yep.
Yeah, absolutely. What I'm hearing from all of you is that you're all doing really great work around outreach, and I think that's fantastic. Super important stuff. I just want to take a minute to let y'all know that a lot of the discussion that we were having today was building on a series that the Colorado State Library has hosted for us on supporting developing readers. You can see all of these presentations archived at the Colorado State Librarian Session website. So feel free to go back and check all of that out. Right now, I think Christine has some closing for us. But again, I wanted to say for Gigi and myself as well, thank you so much for attending today. Kindergarten through 3rd grade is such a crucial time for developing readers, and the connections that we make through outreach, they really do have the potential to make a huge impact throughout these kids' lives. So hopefully you're leaving us today with some new ideas about ways to make and sustain those connections. And yeah, thank you. Christine, I'll let you take it away.
Thanks.
And I would like to thank Gigi and Liesl, as well as the other Denver Public Library staff who have helped with this series. They've shared a lot of really great information. We do have a survey for you to take today. You can click on the link and I'll also put it in the chat, but we're always curious about what you thought of today's session, what ideas and thoughts you have for future sessions. So you can either click on the link on the slide. I've also put it in chat. Also, I am going to put my email in the chat in case you need a certificate. You can go ahead and email me, Christine Krieger, at the email that I've just listed in the chat, and I'd be happy to provide you a certificate for today's session. I have already posted in the chat the link to the CSL in Session website. The archive for today's session will be done in about an hour, so you can go back, once again, revisit some of the resources. Feel free to share the URL with others who you know that maybe couldn't attend the session. The archives will stay up for as long as we think that they should. We have stuff that's been on there for several years now. We also do have 2 more CSLN sessions this month. This upcoming Wednesday, November 6th, we have a great session also from DPL staff, Denver Public Library staff, on conducting the reference interview, how to ask better questions to make customers happy. It will be at noon Colorado time. And then on November 14th, also noon Colorado time, we're going to have a colleague of mine here at the State Library do a session on unearthing seed money, how to locate grants to fund your project. This will have a bit of a Colorado twist to it, but people from outside of Colorado are welcome to attend as well, because Jean will be sharing some really great resources. And yes, the email does have an underscore. Thank you. So Krieger, K-R-E-G-E-R _C at cde.state.co.us. So once again, a kind of a virtual round of applause for today's presenters. And we really thank you guys for taking time to join us for the session today.
Oh, thank you. It was really our pleasure. It's always so great to have this collaboration with Colorado State Library and to be able to kind of share what we've been up to with a wider audience outside of just our own little bubble and outside of even our state. So it's really wonderful to see folks from all over. Really appreciate your time and your energy and attention and your participation as well.
Yeah, likewise. Thanks, everyone.